So last week we started talking about Surah Mu'minoon. And the importance of Surah Mu'minoon, as we discussed last time, is that it is the next level above being a Muslim, right? And so just to recap real quickly, what does it mean to be Muslim? It's the 5 pillars of Islam. And it's very important that I don't think I formed the picture well last week, so inshallah this week I'll try to help really give you a good visualization of what I'm talking about. So we mentioned the 5 pillars, right? The first one we talked about was the Shahada, which you do once in your life. Then the next one was Hajj, which you also do once in your life. And then you do Zakat, which is once a year. Then fasting is 30 days in a year, and then the Salat is 5 times a day. So there's something very, very important about the Salat that Allah requires us to go from once in your life, once a year, 30 days a year, to 5 times a day. And so those 5 pillars kind of build the foundation of what a Muslim is. These ayahs that come in Surah Mu'minoon, they build a building on top of it. And the most important pillar for being a mu'min is the salah. And we know that because the ayat start with قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. No doubt about it, before even talking about the qualities, Allah says, Allah is telling you, these people are already successful. The word God is kind of using it in the past tense, that this is a done deal. These people that I'm about to talk about are really special. And we would consider them the elite class of Muslims. And so, the first quality Allah says is, so it's قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. And when it comes to their prayer, they are especially humble in it. And we describe this as a conversation, right? When you have a conversation with someone that's very important, the effects of that conversation linger on, past the conversation itself. So let's say you get yelled at, right? You still feel the effects of the conversation, even after the initial conversation. And Sheikh Ibrahim, a good example of this would be somebody who's at Bergen County, for example. Let's say you had to meet a judge 5 times a day, okay? And that judge knew exactly what you did in between those 5 times. And yet you still had to present yourself in front of this judge every single time, and you were to have a conversation about being guided. Right? The Fatiha is Ihdina Siratal Mustaqim, guide us. And as soon as you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, you go back to our misguided ways. And so picture that and say, does that even make sense? That we have this conversation with this grand judge, and he knows exactly what we do from salah to salah, and we don't get punished for it. And we speak to him, and sometimes we don't even know what we're saying to him. Right? And this is why it's so important to understand what the words of the salah mean. So first Allah says that they understand what it means to speak to me. That's what it's really saying. They understand who they're speaking to, that's Allah. That's where it starts. The first level of this building, that the 5 pillars of the foundation are built upon, it connects back to the salah. And so it starts with having khushu in your prayer. And when you're especially humble, that means outside of the salah you're humble too. And what we talked about, the next ayat is a progression, because all these ayats are progressive. They're one thing that leads to the another. And it's interesting, the word wa is used before any of the following ayats. And wa in the Quran means and. So it's not like these people just stop here. It's a continuous process. So the next is وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ, right? أَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. And they do not, and وَالَّذِينَ, and these are and these people don't indulge themselves in useless activities. The word law is used, if you translate it, it's for useless talk. Like we just talk about nonsense all day. We just waste our time. And it's not just conversations, it goes beyond that. It's useless activities. So I'm not saying that watching TV is a bad thing, but overindulging in it is terrible for you. Because you realize that you have these 5 opportunities to talk to this Grand Master. And in between these 5 opportunities, what you start to realize is how important time is in itself. And so you don't want to waste your time watching Netflix anymore, watching TikTok videos, just going out, just wasting your time on nothing, watching news all day and night, watching YouTube all day and night. Why? Because you realize you have a very short amount of time. And that's what those 5 salah teach you. that there's only a small gap in between each step. And so in this process, you start to realize I can't waste my time, and like I said, the progression happens. When you stop wasting your time, you have more time to focus on yourself. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. It's a progression, and they are those who focus on purifying themselves. The word zakat is used here, and it's not necessarily just used for the zakat that obviously you pay out yearly. It's a process to do the zakat. Zakat means to purify. And so what you're doing is you're thinking of ways to purify yourself. And this is probably one of the most important topics that anybody can study, is how can I better myself? And it only can come when your mind is clear. And you will read the Quran, and so much of the Quran has to do with clear your minds. So many times, Allah says, if you actually stop for a second and thought about the world around you, you will be humbled just from that. And so in this process, so let's say I have anger management problems, right? And how would I know that? When I have time to sit down and think about it. And Dr. Ashraf Ahmad, may Allah be pleased with him, he used to say that the human personality is like an onion. Once you start to peel back one layer, you'll see the next. And you're going to keep peeling back those layers until you get to the core problem. So let's say my core problem, let's say I have anger management problems. But really when I start to look into it, it's because I have an ego issue because I can't take people saying no to me, for example. But I would only realize that if I stopped and I looked at how my conversations were throughout the day. And this is very important. I'll give an example of a day trader. The person who trades stocks for a living, right? A good day trader, what he does is that he writes down each and every single trade he does, and he scales on how good or bad it was. And then he determines whether or not why he did bad, why he lost money, or why he gained money. And same thing for the believer. We have to sit down at the end of the day and say, okay, how did my day go today? Did I make all the salats? Yes or no? Was I respectful to my parents? Yes or no? Was I good to my co-workers? Was I good to my wife, my children, so on and so forth? If no, why? Where did I fall short? How could I have bettered it? And it takes the blame from the other person to yourself. And this is very important because most of the times we always say that we are the right. In any argument you get into, you can never win. Because regardless of however you perceive it, the other person is always going to think you're wrong. In most cases, especially in a feud. And so we have to look back at ourselves. And even if the other person doesn't change, it doesn't matter. Because we know this progression has to happen. If we want to be a part of this elite group that Allah is talking about, because the word wa is used at the beginning of all these ayats. And it's to symbolize the importance that we need to do all of these qualities. And so the next one is very interesting. Allah says, and they especially guard themselves. Now why does Allah bring this up? Why would they especially guard their chastity or their shamelessness, for example? And this is a very interesting subject because out of all the things that Allah is going to tell you to watch out for, Allah says specifically, hafizun, guard your chastity, guard your shamelessness. Why? Because human beings, our dignity comes from the fact that we have shame, that we have some honor in us. And you look at today's society and it's plagued with shamelessness. Just look at people walking around half naked, doesn't care, doesn't matter to them. And now it's so normal for them that when you see somebody who's like fully clothed, you question why are they fully clothed, are they okay? And if you look on the other side of the spectrum, you look into a filth industry that has just been propagated in society now. This industry is so big, they have billions of dollars pumping into it, and it's polluting the minds of young people today. So much so that these people are growing up with these, what we would call shameless ideas or notions in their head. And what happens to a person's dignity? And the reason I specifically mention this is because Allah really goes into detail about this subject. So let's say there's 11 ayats. Out of these 11 ayats, Allah speaks about this subject for 3 ayats. That means how powerful it is because the salah is talked about in 2 ayats. The first one and the last one. So the idea of guarding our shamelessness is very, very important. Another example, let's say a teenager, right? He goes to school, all his kids are watching just filth on their phones. Filth on the screens, and we all know what I'm talking about. I don't have to get into the specifics. And parents don't even care nowadays. They know what's going on and they don't care. They know it because the whole society is being plagued by it. Why is it just that your child might not be affected by this disease? And you have to open your eyes. And the reason I mention this is because all of you guys are fathers probably in here. And you have to realize this. Even if it's not for yourself, you have to realize that it could be your kids that are affected by this one day. And it's so important because then Allah goes into the next topic and Allah talks about this with 3 ayats. And Allah says, those who indulge in this, basically you can only do this type of stuff with your wife. And those who transgress behind this, then they are the complete transgressors. And it's so important because, as I mentioned, in the Quran, when this topic of zina or shamelessness is talked about in the Quran, usually the following ayat or the ayat before it is about murder. Murder in Islam. Why? Because murder in the physical sense is death, right? But when you commit, for example, zina, it's murder in the spiritual sense. It kills a person. It brings their life down. Think about it. If those rumors start to spread, it destroys a person's household. I mean, you know it from just take the examples of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when they accused Aisha radiallahu anha. Or go back to Surah Mu'minoon, when she came back to the town with Isa Islam in her hand, and they said what to her? Oh, we did not even expect this from you. And what did Maryam alayhi salam say? As she was pregnant or after she had Isa alayhi salam, she said, oh my God, this day is going to be so difficult. Because she knew the effects that this would have on society. So just imagine the people that are actually going through this difficulty, that are legitimately in like a relationship that's awful and they know they've done something wrong. And it is up to us, the people in this room, the fathers in this room, the mothers in this room, to guard our children as well. And I'm not going into this just for no reason. I've seen it. I've seen it throughout my whole life. Where kids, they go through depression and all these things. Why? Because they don't guard themselves. And Allah doesn't just say, don't do this. He says, guard yourself from it. Because it could be one of the once you get caught in it, it's like an invisible gravity field. And once you get caught, man, there's nothing saving you. Because it's invisible. Nobody else can see it or smell it but you. And once you crash, then you know you really hit rock bottom. And then the next ayah. It's actually a progression from this. And then Allah says they are also those, when it comes to giving their word, they live up to it. Why is this important? We just talked about guarding ourselves, correct? Now, let's say I'm a kid, and you're my dad, right? Yeah, just for example's sake, right? Let's say I have a girlfriend, right? Now, in my mind, if I'm reading these ayats, and I know these ayats, and I'm in this position, literally the next ayat is they honor their word. What does that mean? That means that as a father and son, the father expects certain trust from the child. You expect me to do what's right when you're not there, correct? And this is what this ayat is talking about. It's not just talking about business dealings, it's talking about personal relationships and giving your word. When I say I'm going to do something, I really try my best. And if I can't fulfill it, I keep you updated on it. They are constantly on top of their word. This is what it means to a Muslim. And these qualities that I've talked about, they're nothing grand, spectacular. Allah's not asking you, to read 100 rakats in Tarawih. These are progressions to what make you a better person. Allah's not forcing us to become Muslim. The Fatiha, when we read it, what do we understand from it? That we're speaking to Allah. Allah's not speaking to us. The Fatiha is a conversation to Allah. None of it is forced down upon us. And Allah is saying the best of the best people, when they start realizing who I am in that conversation with me, then they start to become this amazing person that they didn't even know they were before. And then to connect it all back, Allah says, and they are those who what? Constantly guard their prayers. Why? Because we built this building. It starts with khushu and salah. then the next level is you're not wasting your time. Then you start to focus on bettering yourself. And then you guard your chastity. And then you live up to your word. You live up to your trust. And then what? Allah says they guard their 5 daily prayers. Why is this so important? Because in this process of bettering ourselves, the shaitan is going to come to you and he's going to tell you, man, you did a great job today. You resisted, replying back to that sister, right? You prayed your first 4 salahs for the day. You don't need to pray Isha. You're good. Just go to sleep, right? And what is he trying to do? He's trying to kick down that pillar that the foundation is built upon, the salah. And so this is why Allah connects everything back in a loop. It's a cycle then. Because if it starts with salah, or quality salah, Allah ends in with the quantity. Make sure you're following up on your salah. Make sure you're guarding them. And that's how you get this endless cycle. Right? And then what is the reward for these people? الَّذِينَ يَرِثُونَ الْفِرْدَوْسَ هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. Well, first Allah says they are the inheritors. Pause. End of ayah. What does that mean? They are the inheritors. When Allah builds something up, Allah usually makes the ayah before it very short and crisp. And He leaves you guessing. They're the inheritors of what? And what does inheritance mean? Let's say I die today. I don't have kids, but let's say I had kids, right? They would get whatever I own. So that's inheritance. When somebody's not there anymore, you get it. So Allah is saying these people are going to get something that other people didn't show up for. And then Allah says, الَّذِينَ يَرِثُونَ الْفِرْدَوْسَ هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. They are going to be the inheritors of Jannat al-Firdaus. هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. And they will reside in it forever. These people, right, we make dua day and night for Jannat al-Firdaus. And here Allah says, here's a recipe for Jannat al-Firdaus back. That's all you gotta do. Start with the salah and build yourself up, better your word, right? And continue it up with the 5 daily prayers. And just because of this, and you can see the optimism Allah has for all of us. Why would Allah say that we are the inheritors? Because each and every single one of us in this room, we have a house in Jannah for those waiting for us. And not all of us are going to get it. And so Allah is saying, just try your best. These ayats are not asking for you to become a hafiz Quran. They're not asking for something very difficult. Allah is not saying come to the masjid 5 times a day. He's saying focus on bettering yourself. And when Ramadan is coming around the corner, and these are the daily checklist items that we need to start asking ourselves. And especially for me, I know these ayats. So you can just imagine that, let's say I read my salah fast. I feel extremely guilty at the end of it. But it's okay. The reason that guilt is there, it shows that there is faith left in us. That we understand these ayats because we miss this conversation with Allah. When you miss a salah, this 5th quality, when you miss one salah, how guilty do you feel? You feel like you're the worst human being on this planet. Right? Why is that? Because Allah has designed you in a way where you have this extreme personal connection with Allah. So Jazakallah khair for listening today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
Barakallahu feekum, jazakallahu khair.